Good morning and welcome back to Realtor Reacts. This is episode 20. I'm Christopher, the Realtor in Realtor Reacts. Um, Guys, we did it. We made the episode 20. I'm excited. What are we going to do for episode 20? How are we going to celebrate? Well, I was thinking maybe we do a two-parter. Rusty Nielsen is on the show today, and we're going to be diving into Rusty's video, 15 deed restrictions you need to know before moving to the villages, or if you're currently in the villages. The video is 42 minutes long, the core video. We're going to break it up into two parts. I'm going to try and keep this around 30 minutes per segment. It's going to be interesting. Again, Realtor Reacts. I don't know what the content is. I've got the title card to work with. So without further ado, let's jump in and see what Rusty has to say about deed restrictions.
Today I'm going to go over some stuff that may not make some people happy that are going to move here to the villages. And if you already live here in the villages, you may not be too happy with me for regurgitating this. But like a famous man once said, just the facts, ma'am. And that's what I'm going to go over. Let's go ahead and get started. Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm Rusty Nelson and welcome. Today we're going to talk about something that it's not controversial, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretty much regurgitate most of the stuff that I'm going to give to you is facts. As most of you know, in most of my videos, I like to do a lot of research, and I find out about these things simply because these are things I'm going through while I'm living at the villages. But deed restrictions and covenants are something that I've noticed lately. I've seen a lot in the forums, a lot of the pages, people spouting out this, spouting out that, getting all upset, and it's causing a lot of contention between neighbors. And I'm going to give, like I said, almost mostly facts. I'm going to read right from my deed restrictions, a lot of stuff. And I think if you are thinking about buying a home here in the villages, or you already own a home, you should probably listen to this unless you've gone over it page by page for yourself. Now, in the very beginning, I'm going to give you a little bit of philosophy from my end about deed restrictions, talk about it just for a second. And then I'm going to go over my own deed restrictions, which are generally applicable to most of the villages. And especially when you start moving from District 13 down, or District 3 down to 13, and now you got 14, who knows, 15, 16, 17, by the time you listen to this. And if you don't understand what a CDD is, or deed restrictions, or bonds, and that kind of stuff, I have a video. I'll put it right here or here, wherever, and you can see that. And I'll put the link down below. You can go watch that and you may understand it. But in the villages, there are areas that are designated by number, 1 through 14, say, and each one has its own little government rules and regulations and covenants. We don't have an HOA, so to speak. We have these covenants, deed restrictions that we need to follow. Now,
I'm going to hop in for just a moment here, right? Add a little clarification. Um, for a very long time, the kind of go-to terminology and wording was in the villages, we don't have an HOA, we have CDD, right? So let's add a little clarification. HOA, POA, CDD, what do? They maintain the integrity of the community, okay? They serve a similar function. They're mechanically different in terms of legal entities, but they serve a similar function across the board. Throughout my time here in the villages, without fail, folks are familiar with HOAs. They'll come into the open house, they'll ask me about the HOA. And of course, this is always perplexing for me because while there are a handful of HOAs within the community, within certain neighborhoods for specific reasons, the vast majority of the villages falls under the purview of CDD, or it's structured under the CDD system. So, it happens quite a bit. So that's the first point of clarification. Are there HOAs? Yes. There's a few specialty neighborhoods that have HOAs. They're kind of sprawled out in different areas of the community. But the vast majority of the villages falls under the CDD, the 1 through 13 currently, going into 14 and 15, I'm sure, down the road here. And then there's a specialty unit, I think it's called VCCDD, on the Lake County side in Sector 2 there, and in Sector 1, that behaves slightly differently. But for all intents and purposes, is still a functionary under CDD. So let's hop back in here.
Here is I need to give a disclaimer on a few things. One, I don't work for the villages. I am not a professional at this. I'm looking this up just as though anybody else could look it up. But there are some areas that I'm looking at that are really important that I see people talking about that they either got it wrong or I don't quite understand their philosophy or what they're talking about. Because if you read the deed restrictions, they are pretty blatant about what you can and you can't do. It's just as simple as that. Now, I will say that in my research, I went up to community standards. You can go on district.gov or .org, whatever, and you can find out where community standards is. I went up there with a few questions before I did this video. They would not talk to me. This has happened twice where I've tried to deal with these folks, and they would not talk to me. Now, it may be because I have my YouTube channel. I don't know. They kind of pawned me off to the communications department, which I was told not to contact, that they'd contact me. They didn't contact me. So I'm assuming by their actions that they do not want to answer any of the questions. So with that said, I'm going to read mostly and right off of my deed restrictions. But like I said, they will apply a lot to probably your district, wherever you live, but you need to check your own individual deed restrictions. Now, we all look at these.
So let me hop in here real quick. Districtgov.org is the CDD's webpage. It's a great source of information. They do their best to disseminate, what they can. Um, why if we're going to community standards or the district management team there, kind of in a broader context, right? Are we not getting answers to our questions? I had a situation recently, right? When we're buying a home, we utilize a contract. Now, there's variations on contracts and there's addendums, and you can modify contracts, right? There's a lot of things you can do with contracts. But once you're in a contract, enforcement is not something that falls within the purview of a realtor, okay, or a licensed real estate professional in the state of Florida. Enforcement is outside of our powers, okay? That's going to fall to a judge that presides within the jurisdiction of the dispute, if there should be a dispute arising out of a contract. CDD covenant and restrictions, okay, are essentially a agreement. I won't call it a contract, but we get the idea, okay, between the homeowner and the governing body, right? It is an agreement between those two parties. And thus, when interpreting the agreement between the two parties, okay, that's going to fall into the purview of a licensed real estate professional attorney, right? You're gonna, anytime that you're dealing with an attorney, right, the first thing that they're going to tell you is stop talking, be quiet, right? When we're trying to interpret things that were written by attorneys, and that the enforcement of which will probably fall under the purview of an attorney, right? If you get into some type of dispute between the parties, you're going to need the appropriately legal professional, okay? So what happened here, right? Rusty had some general questions, okay? He went to the place where he thought he could get those answered, right? Reasonable expectation, okay? CDD does put forward a public face that suggests that they are open to communication in this way. But because of the nature of the questions, and maybe his YouTube channel had something to do with it, but probably not. This is probably more of a general standard and practice, okay? They cannot give out legal interpretations, right? Rusty is asking a general question for the sake of knowledge. Okay, it's not couched in a specific dispute or an issue, right? So there's no case number, right? There's nothing happening, okay, and thus they're not going to necessarily invest the time to just answer general questions, right? Particularly when this falls under the purview of a attorney, okay. All these deed restrictions at some point or another were fashioned and formed under Florida state law. Okay. Bearing in mind any type of federal housing regulations. Okay. And they were drafted by a law firm and put into practice and will be enforced by a court having jurisdiction over these matters if it gets to that point. All right. And that's kind of where this comes into. The person sitting at the desk at community standards probably isn't legally sufficient to answer these questions. And that's kind of where this handoff happened, right? And the attorney is looking at it and saying, I don't need to answer this guy's questions. Why? Well, I'm not here to just answer general questions. I'm here to protect the interests of the parties. So that's more or less my understanding of how this tends to go. All right, let's jump back in here. I only tell you this so that if you try and go through this process, you have some context and understanding of why you're meeting this kind of glass ceiling, right? This wall, and you're not getting your questions answered. If you have questions about your deed restrictions or your contracts, okay, you need to consult a licensed attorney in the state of Florida. That's your best bet. All right, let's move on.
Deed restrictions when we move in here. We all know that we're going to be involved in this. And all the landlords that have rental people, you need to let them know it's your responsibility. I believe that it's your responsibility to let your renters know exactly what they can and they cannot do within these deed restrictions. With that said, I am
So that's an interesting thing, culpability, right? If you are renting out your property, the agreement is between the owner and the governing body, right? But if you are renting out that property, the leaser, no, the leaseholder, the renter. Sorry, it's morning. I'm having a hard time finding my words. Um, Inherits your responsibilities, right? They get all your privileges, right? That comes along with the rent. They also get all the responsibilities, but the accountability still lies with the homeowner. Okay, so just bear that in mind. If your tenant is doing things that are going to cause conflicts between you as an owner and the governing body, right? No different than anything else. Okay, the accountability is still going to fall on the homeowner, regardless of who the perpetrating party was. All right, let's go ahead and proceed.
am going to go through what I consider the important part and what I see like on the forums. And I get a lot of questions about this stuff. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to go through it pretty quick. You can go back and look at it. And I will divide it up into chapters down below so you can look that up, go to the specific time code. Like if you want to look up something about pets or you want to look up something about lawn ornaments or commercial trucks parked in your driveway or how old you have to be to live in the villages. Yeah, we're going to cover a lot of this and we're going to run through it really quick because, like I said, it's all factual. So here's the thing if you already live here and you have something like this, or you have something like this, or maybe you have something like this, or something like that, or whoa, something like that, then I really think you need to listen to this.
Hold on. Wait a minute. What's the whoa part? You're telling me this gnome with his butt hanging halfway out of his pants is less offensive than this? I guess that's an ant with a spear? Or the gnome flipping him the middle finger? Okay, I mean, I guess it's open to interpretation. Sure, let's jump back. You gotta laugh sometime. You gotta have a good time with it. Jumping back in. Here we go.
this, and you need to understand exactly what's going on with these deed restrictions and covenants and how they're enforced. Now, jumping back really quick to the statement that I made that the community standards would not talk to me. I went up there, and actually, the people at the desk and the first person I talked to um, were very polite, very nice. But once I started to get into the questions a little bit, they kind of pawned me off to somebody else. They wouldn't talk to me. They said I needed to talk to uh, who knows. They wouldn't even tell me who the person was I needed to talk to. They just took my number down and then never called me back. So now you know exactly. I'm just reporting about what happened to me. I'm happy to talk with them anytime. I wish they had, so we could have answered some questions and it would have been a little more official. But I want to explain my philosophy, and I think it will help some people understand exactly what's going on in my mind or my thought with these deed restrictions. There's a lot of things that make the villages what the villages is. And obviously, the biggest thing is the people, but also there is our community. And when you move here, you basically say, yeah, I like what's here. I like what I see. I like how clean things are. I like how uniform things are. I like this. I like that. I like that people pick up their own trash or other people's trash off the ground. I like that I don't have to worry about Joe working on his car in the driveway for 5 weeks and oil all over the place. You get it, right? So jump back for just a second here. You move into this neighborhood and let's shrink this neighborhood down really small to say there's only 5 homes in the neighborhood. One home goes up for sale. You look at it and you decide that you want to move in and be part of this neighborhood. You walk in and 4 of your neighbors are standing there. And they all say, God, we'd love to have you, Rusty. But to be here, you need to follow, you see how everything is around here. You need to follow these deed restrictions. And the reason we have these deed restrictions is because it's not that we want to be overpowering or we want to be governmental or be controlling. It's because we've run into problems before. And it's just as easy if we make these deed restrictions apply to everybody. And Rusty looks at all of them and then goes, yeah, that sounds good. And they hand me the little Bible and I go ahead and read through it. And I say, that's great. And I sign my deed and everything else and I move in. Now, if you were one of those people and Rusty moved into your neighborhood, and as soon as he moved in, he parked the Oscar Mayer Wiener truck in his driveway. And then he started to run it every day. He left and went to work. But in your driveway, you had the Oscar Mayer Wiener truck. And when you came up to him and said something, he went, I'm going to hide it because I don't want you to see it. But basically said, F you to the neighbors. And I said, I don't care. I know I signed that thing, but I like the Oscar Mayer Wiener truck. I like that big thing in my front yard. And you as neighbors say, well, we agreed. You agreed. You looked at us right in the eye and you said, come on into our neighborhood and be part of the neighborhood. And then you did this to it, right? I liken that the same thing with the villages, except you got 100 and some thousand people that live under this umbrella. Now, when one person moves in and they put some type of lawn art or they put some kind of political banner on their front yard, or they put a big for sale sign, plunk it down in their yard. You are the person, or me, if it was in that small community, you are the person that is violating what I would think I might even call a contract with your friends and neighbors. And by doing that, you're kind of going, meh, to you, I don't care. I like this sign right here in my yard, right? And that's kind of what you're doing. So I look at it as,
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'll tell a quick story. In my neighborhood, about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, we had a gentleman in front of the neighborhood, right? So when you come into my neighborhood, There's only one way in, one way out, right? He happens to have the house on the corner right as you enter the neighborhood. And on the side of his fence, paralleling the entry road, he had a sign up, or it was a flag. But he had it hanging off the side of the fence. That's not the problem. The meaning in the context behind that particular flag was not something that I and several other members of the neighborhood felt was how we wanted the neighborhood to be represented. Okay, it was offensive, and it was meant to be offensive. Okay, and you know, for the first time ever, I made a phone call, right, to the board. In my neighborhood, we have a POA, so the board is the first stop. The board isn't necessarily there for enforcement, but the board is the one to initiate enforcement. Okay, so there's a chain of communication that needs to occur. And I said, listen, I said, I'm not Joe Rules. Okay, I'm not trying to be difficult and, police my neighbors, right? That's not my role in the neighborhood. My role is to enjoy my life here and, protect the neighborhood the best I can so that my kids are safe and everybody else's kids are safe as well. But I felt that it warrant at least a discussion. Okay. And really, I was just hoping, we would be able to ask him to take it down. Right. I didn't want to make a big thing about it, you know. And so the conversation ensued. And basically, this got into, freedom of speech and all that type of thing. And so we looked into that and, all this type of stuff. And my position on it was yes, you are exercising your freedom of speech by putting this flag up. Okay. But you waived your ability to do that when you signed in, right? When you purchased and received a copy of the covenant and restrictions. Here you agreed, right, to play by certain rules, right? To behave with certain guidelines. Okay. And so, while yes, you walked into this situation with those things intact, right? You electively waived it or modified it by agreeing to this, right? And that's essentially what it came down to. Fortunately, and I didn't feel the need, and nobody else felt the need to escalate things, right? Fortunately, this individual came to see reason, right? And that flag was pulled down. Okay. Nobody forced him to do it. I think that he reached the same conclusion. If it's going to cause, a fuss, right? There's no point in making enemies out of neighbors, right? It's not an environment you want to live in. Okay. But he made an agreement. We all made an agreement. My neighborhood's a great example. 99 homes, right? It's not a traditional village. Okay. It's a different animal. And I don't even know the gentleman's name, and I have no problem with him having an opinion, right? If his home had been, and I think I had said this when I had addressed the concerns, right? If his home had been on the back end of the neighborhood and not right up front where everybody has to drive through every day, right, like a billboard, I wouldn't have cared at all, right? It's simply a fact of the matter is that we have homes for sale in this neighborhood, right? And you are, whether you intend to or not, detrimenting those sales, right? And giving the false impression of what this neighborhood is by hanging this flag off the side of your fence and doing so deliberately, because you had another side of the fence. You didn't hang it over there. You didn't hang it off the back or off the front. You hanged it off the side that was closest to the entry road. It was deliberate, right? Please take it down or move it. Either or, right? All right, enough story time. Let's jump back in.
Immediately, you're doing this out of disrespect to your neighbors. Your neighbors have not done anything wrong. Now, in a HOA, a lot of these management companies will hire somebody I know because my cousin did it. They will hire somebody to once a week or once a month or once a quarter go around the neighborhoods, and they even walk through the back of the neighborhoods, and they look down and they write everything down. Then they come back to the management, and the management will actually fine you right away. I know because I know people that are in HOAs and they don't even ask questions. You just do whatever you want, you plant whatever you want without permission, you're automatically fined. And that fine will attach to the property until you go to sell it, and you still got to pay it, right? So you're going to have to pay it. The point being is that if you come into the neighborhood, you agree to do certain things and you don't do them, it's disrespecting your neighbors. Now, in a CDD, the way they have it set up, it is the owners, the people that live there. It's their duty to self-police themselves. It's their duty to go out and look at the way I look at it, and I've seen it written in other places, to go out and actually say, hey, you know what, this person's not doing this. To prevent confrontation, right? To prevent confrontation, they make it anonymous. So you can send to the authorities, you can send a note saying, hey, this person's out of compliance, so on and so on. They come by and they don't necessarily, as I know, fine you right away. They give you a nice call and say, hey, I'm sorry, but you can't put the Oscar Mayer Wiener truck in your front yard. You need to move it, and we'll give you a week to move it. If not, we're going to fine you. And there's actually charts that they have that say, if you do this or if you do that, we can levy a fine, a tax, whatever you want to call it, of so much. I mean, it's all written out. It's very organized. So my thing is if you move into the neighborhood and you decide that you're going to put tchotchke A in your front yard, you're
I'm not an expert on these proceedings, right? I can only go based on my experience here. So if you've had a different experience, please don't jump in the comment section and jump all over me on this. Okay? I'm not an expert in these proceedings. My experience has essentially been when the CDD receives a complaint, they investigate very briefly, very surface level. Okay? And then a letter will go out. It's not necessarily a phone call. Okay? Maybe it's a phone call, but I've never heard of a phone call happening. It's usually a letter. Okay? So that's in writing. And in that letter, it states their concerns. Sometimes there's photographs attached. It generally outlines the portion of the deed restriction that they believe you are violating, and that they ask you to either remedy it or be subject to their ability to enforce, whether that be fines or whatever else they intend to do. Generally, it's fines. Okay, and they are fines; they're not taxes, right? This is an enforcement mechanism. Okay, but there are mechanics inherent in the process for disputing this, right? There are requirements, as far as I can tell, for disputing this, right? There's a matter of public hearing. There's a matter of, can you get back in compliance, right? Maybe it was accidental, and it happens, right? Some nuanced thing, right? That your neighbor 3 doors down or 4 doors down, who has a lot of free time and chooses to invest it in reading every word of the deed restrictions and then interpreting the meaning behind those words, right? As such as that they want to police the neighborhood. This can be a challenge. The anonymous part, I get the anonymous part. Okay. Got to be careful with weaponizing this, though, right? And it can happen. So, there's that. But as far as the process goes, as far as I can see, right, in my experiences and the stories that I've heard, remember, I've never directly dealt with CDD as I'm not under contract with them. I'm not subject to their rules. I have my POA in my neighborhood. Um, they're pretty fair and equitable about these things, and you have to understand this kind of goes back to statements that I've made previously on this channel, right? There was a time when the CDD was a bit more overbearing, right? And it caused friction with the resident base, and that had a negative impact on sales. And as soon as the sales oops, quick cut, hit the record limit again. my cue to wrap things up. As I was saying before we hit the record limit there, once sales dip, change tends to occur. Go figure, right? So CDD has kind of relaxed a little bit. Again, the enforcement on these things is built around resident complaints. Okay. Um, it's really kind of like what Rusty was saying. It's really upon the residents to utilize the deed restrictions, the agreement between the parties, um, to live the way that they expect to live within the community, um, based on the agreement. So, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this episode for this week. We got 12 minutes and some change into the core video, so this is probably going to be a three-parter in hindsight, at this rate. No way to foresee that. I was hoping to get 20, 25 minutes into the video, but maybe that was unrealistic on my part. All right. Well, hey, listen, no better way to celebrate episode 20 than by doing a three-parter, right? It's worth the time investment, I think. This has been Realtor Reacts. Take care of yourselves. Take care of others where you can. And I hope to see you next week. Thanks for joining us.